When is the last time you heard that less than a third of Ohio's children, third graders, fourth graders, are proficient in reading?
Yeah.
Less than a third fourth and eighth graders are proficient in math. You would think that would be front page news, especially if it's been the last decade of kids not being able to read well and do math well.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews, Baer and David Mahan, and a special episode today as we're joined in person by the one and only Dave Yost.
Good morning.
It is so good to have you here. Thanks for coming to our beautiful new studio.
I love it.
Yeah, it's great to have this opportunity to talk with you. And there's so many things we could cover with you. Aaron, I don't even know. You gave me first option, and I've got so many things swimming in my head. I feel like I should defer.
Well,
to
there's
you.
nothing going on with you personally right now, right? Just all quiet. Yeah,
I haven't heard a single thing about what's going on.
We're
going
to
to
get to that. I want to wrap with that. That way we keep them hooked to the end of the episode.
Right. What could it be?
Yeah. Right.
It's just good broadcasting.
But yeah, exactly. But I think literally, as I was prepping for this one, I got 8 topics we could cover. I think the thing that where we should probably start is the thing that's dominating the news in Ohio right now and nationally. And I think we're going to have either Luke Brodziak or Parker from the Daily Wire on. But you and I even talked about what's your take? What's your perspective on what the Daily Wire has put out on all this Medicaid fraud that they're exposing and bringing to light?
Well, I'm glad they're doing the work.
Yeah.
I want to take one slight caveat and say there's a difference between fraud that you can prove in court and suspicious stuff. So some of the stuff that's been coming out in the published reports surely bears looking into. It doesn't pass the smell test, but there's not nearly enough facts to be able to say crime occurred, money was stolen. On the other hand, they've certainly uncovered some things that probably come up to pretty close to probable cause. They're all true. But here's the thing. Our Medicaid fraud control unit has been working for years, but we don't do press conferences when we start an investigation. It's private until, by law, until we get to a grand jury and indict somebody at the federal or state level. A number of the things that they've written about are things where we've already prosecuted somebody. And there are other things that are in the works. And, I was glad to see the governor, issuing some new controls. But you asked me what I think about it. That's in general. What I was astounded to find was that the geolocation, the GPS controls on home health workers were turned off. I was an auditor of state before I was attorney general. And one of the things that we found with the explosion of home-based services, which we love, that it protects the dignity of the individual, lets them maintain a degree of independence in their own home. It's a wonderful thing, and usually at a lower cost. But there's no supervisor. It's not a nursing home where there's a supervisor of nursing and a director of the nursing home and all that stuff. You're just out there driving around in your car saying, I stopped over here and helped Mrs. Smith with her bathing or whatever it is that you were doing. And the GPS was a way we could corroborate the billings with, the car was at Mrs. Smith's house for 42 minutes on this date. And that's kind of hard to fake, not completely impossible, but hard to fake. For reasons that nobody has explained, somewhere after I left the auditor's office, after having won that situation and the federal law changed and required it, they turned it off. How did that happen? Why did that happen?
And is that just a decision an administration can make, or how does that even come about?
Well, there's a reasonable question whether they're complying with federal law with it turned off. I don't know who made that decision. I haven't been able to find out. That unquestionably opened the door to some shady practices out there. At any rate, I talked with the leader of Vice President Vance's task force 2 days ago. about this. We've been in contact with Federal Department of Justice. They've asked to in on our investigation, so we have ongoing. So we're on it. We've been on it. We're going to stay on it, and
Yeah.
people will be held accountable.
Well, yeah, because I remember I saw Jim Jordan post out it was maybe even last week. You guys just did 9 indictments on Medicaid fraud, up in Cleveland, I think, or no, maybe it was down here. It was in Franklin County that was prosecuted. And this is always the easy punching bag for us to come back to on this. But when I see something like this story, it reminds me of the former owners of this building that we're sitting in today. Why is it that it has to be the Daily Wire to cover these things, right? It's the same thing like Nick Shirley. Why does it have to be Nick Shirley that does these things?
Because you kicked the Dispatch out of their
No,
building.
I'm just saying,
they can't
No,
operate.
they got kicked out of their building because they're not doing investigations anymore. I mean, like you've been dealing with the Ohio Media Corps longer than we have, and that's not an age joke. I direct those at Mahan. But what's your take on where Ohio media has gone and why, they're so incessant on, again, writing big investigative pieces on Christians or conservatives. They come at us all the time. And then there's glaring things like this where even, again, we'll find out how much of this is actually illegal fraud that they can prove, but it's a big smoking gun to have, what did he say, like 90 healthcare at home businesses in one building. With no signage. And I think a letter from you guys sitting on one of them saying, hey, we're calling you to court right now. And it's just sitting there because who knows when the last time that guy was there.
Mail stacked up under the door.
The media all have their point of view. In the 80s and 90s, they started changing from the old model of objective journalism to point of view journalism. And the theory was there is no such thing as objectivity. Let's stop pretending and let's empower marginalized communities, et cetera, to just write from their point of view, their lived truth. Well, I think there is such a thing as objectivity, and I think it starts with, in the beginning, God created.
Yep.
But let's also recognize that what we're experiencing right now is a reversion to the mean. Through most of American history, the media was incredibly fragmented. Everybody wrote from a point of view. You had Republican newspapers, you had Democratic newspapers, you had communist newspapers, you had worker newspapers. You had business newspapers, and a lot of people would read 3 or 4 newspapers in a big city every day so that they got the full range.
Yeah.
It was only in the post-war era in America with the dominance of television and 3 major networks that we kind of had this so-called golden age where the goal was objectivity and there was kind of this presumed set of facts about which we were arguing. So what's happening now is really going back to the way it's always been. And so we've got to be gentle as doves, but wise as serpents, I think, in this environment, and recognize that you're not going to get everything you need out of the Columbus Dispatch. You better read the Daily Wire or the Wall Street Journal or whatever your source is.
Yeah.
And to your point, Aaron, I think what's so frustrating about it is with the welfare or Medicaid allegations, it's that this is an issue that should concern both sides.
Yep.
Like whether or not you think that immigrants should be able to participate or lead these programs, like that's not at issue here. The issue is that taxpayers are being exploited. And they're not reporting on it.
Oh yeah. No, that's exactly. Well, and it's funny because to me, this ties strangely directly to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is Kalshi and Polymarket. But I tie it to this because Kalshi and Polymarket, these prediction markets, they're all to me in the same vein as sports betting. And what I think a lot of folks don't realize, Medicaid makes up, over a third of the Ohio state budget. And, we have a ton of great Republicans across the street that want to cut taxes, want to do away with the income tax, want to deal with property tax. And every time we lower taxes, that creates a hole in the budget. right? We've got to figure out what we're doing. And so the responsible conservative thing that says is let's cut spending or let's eliminate fraud. The irresponsible thing that sometimes comes up is, oh, let's just expand revenue through exploiting people to play games that they can't win, or taxing these new prediction markets and things like that. And this is when you hear numbers of billions of dollars of potential fraud. Yeah, that we just clean up fraud, and we might be able to deal with property taxes for all we know, or we might be able to eliminate the income tax for all we know, and not have to go down that path. So, General, before we even get to Kalshi and Polymarket, from a conservative perspective, how should we be thinking about? How do you think about these sports betting issues or gambling broadly in the prediction markets?
Well, I wasn't for gambling being legalized.
Yeah.
The science is pretty evident that gambling over time degrades the neighborhoods where it occurs and society overall. But that cat is out of the bag, and so we have it. Now the question is, are we going to treat all of these gambling facilities under the same level playing field, the same set of rules? And Kalshi and Polymarket are trying to argue that they're a different kind of thing, that they're more of an economic hedge that is regulated by the federal government as an economic thing, not as an entertainment, sports betting,
Right.
gambling operation that is traditionally the purview of the states.
Right. And that makes total sense then why they would, if you're an economic or a stock market, or if you're like an E-Trade, you go and get Giannis Antetokounmpo from the NBA to be your spokesperson, right? You go get athletes. No, wait, that's what Kalshi did. They go get NBA players. General, could you, for folks who might not be familiar with how these prediction markets work, what's the big picture of what they do that and their argument is like, oh no, we're not sports betting, we're something different. What is the nature of these prediction markets?
So you put your money on a particular outcome. The Knicks are going to lead in the fourth quarter of that particular game, or Amy Acton will be the next governor of Ohio. And if that thing happens, within at that time, then there's a payout to you if you were right. And if you were wrong, you lose your money. That sounds exactly
That's
like
sports betting. Exactly. Yeah.
If it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck,
exactly.
it's a duck.
It's a duck. Exactly. It's sports betting. And that's, I mean, there's been two stories on this that I think have really highlighted the corruption of this thing. Number one, you had one of the SEALs or Green Berets who bet $30,000 or something like that Maduro was going to be captured because he was on the actual mission and won $400,000 out of it.
It's crazy.
Again, and to me, when I hear stuff like that, of course you have sports games being rigged now. If you have the military service members doing that, knowing what's going to happen, there's no doubt you see athletes doing those same things. But then I think it was the Wall Street Journal just had a piece that showed it's less than 1% of individuals who bet on these prediction markets actually come out ahead.
Right.
And
it's
again,
a sucker's game.
It's a sucker. All of these are just it's when you go to Vegas, it wasn't built by winners. It's nonsense.
General, so many times on the podcast, what we try to help our listeners understand is what you never hear from most politicians. When we're talking about gambling, usually it's how it affects the individual, the consumer, even sports integrity side of this, what it's doing to the game. You have a unique position as AG where you're dealing with industries. You see when all of the lobbyists start getting bought up. You see when we pass indecent exposure monetization, you see Pornhub, right, who doesn't want that law because it affects, their ability to reach kids. And you attack at the industry level as they are breaking the laws of our state. Can you kind of help our listeners understand that process of, when the gambling industry comes in, when the marijuana industry, the porn industry, what does that look like for a state when they first start targeting Ohioans?
Yeah. So as you alluded to, and you would see from your perch here at CCV, the warning sign is when the big dollar lobbyists all start showing up, and it's kind of like the old saw about practicing law in a small town. If you're the only lawyer in a small town, you're starved. If you can get somebody else to move in,
Yeah.
so there's two of you, you'll both get rich.
Yeah.
When you see uh, different sides revving up their high-priced lobbyists, then you know that something bad is going to happen to
That's
somebody.
right. Yep.
So, Aaron, I think we need a high-priced lobby.
Yeah, we start there, right? Yeah.
$30,000.
Record, David is not a high-priced
Exactly.
lobbyist.
Oh no, he's very buried sheep.
Thanks, General. Appreciate it.
Yeah. No.
Now everybody knows I'm broke.
Yeah.
But the Attorney General's office, our role is to enforce the law where we're given that authority. And there are some places where they pass a law and there's no enforcement mechanism. One of the problems with the age verification law was they gave us the authority to file a lawsuit, but no authority to issue subpoenas or do an investigation. Well, how are you going to do a lawsuit if you can't get any information out of the industry? So House Bill 84 is hopefully going to fix that oversight in the Pornhub age consent
Innocence Act,
thing. But here, with regard to Kalshi and Polymarket, our office has been defending. They came on, started the fight, and said, "Hey, federal court, we want a court order to make the Attorney General in the state of Ohio and the Gaming Commission leave us alone because we're preempted. We're actually a swath that's regulated by a federal agency." They lost. We won that argument. They asked the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals to issue a stay pending appeal. And the Sixth Circuit said, no, we don't think so. And so right now, with my office's support, the Casino Control Commission, Gaming Commission, is socked them with a $5 million fine for operating gambling without a license. If we're successful there, I fully expect to see some county-based prosecutions for criminal violations of the gambling code. So lots going on there, but that's kind of the anatomy of how this is at the moment.
Yeah, and that's one of those pieces, at the State House. I think for a lot of folks, you look at the folks that get elected to the State House are folks from, rural, strong red parts of the state. And then all of a sudden they'll be voting for things like sports betting and to understand the pressure cooker that gets created down here by these various industries is just massive.
Well, and don't misunderstand. There's a reason bookies have made money throughout history. Lots of people enjoy gambling. They want to do it. So legislators aren't just hearing from the lobbyists. They're hearing from their constituents that want this. I view my job in public service as to listen to the people, but also to make decisions for the greater good, not to cave to the loudest voices. You wouldn't believe some of the comments that have come into the office about me as I have, tried to enforce Ohio's law and opposed Kalshi's grab for an unregulated gambling market.
Yeah, why is the regulation so important on it? Because sports gambling is legal in Ohio, why do we specifically need to regulate Kalshi?
Well, Kalshi is operating outside the existing, so everybody else, the casinos, the racinos, et cetera, are all operating under the law as it exists. Kalshi's out there saying, it's Wild West, we can do whatever we want to as long as we don't upset the feds.
Right.
So we're talking about a level playing field. The rule of law, everybody talking about the rule of law, this dusty concept. It's very simple. What it means is same rules for everybody.
Right. Yeah, that's a great summary, because I can't see how people would be upset with making everybody play by the same rules on that front.
Yeah,
even if we don't like the rules that are currently in place.
And again, this then gets us to the point of, like, this is the difference of policymakers and policy enforcers, right? Separation of powers here, where what we're trying to do with Save Ohio Sports is say we're going to make everyone play by the same rules, and the new rules are only betting at casinos, none of this mobile stuff, and those are the debates that we're having right now at the State House, and trying to, because of the the damaging effect these especially these apps have on young men, on kids, on families. But I want to pivot, General. It's interesting. I actually just got a call today from a friend in Virginia. They're getting ready to fight an abortion amendment there. And she was asking, it's the same playbook they brought here on issue 1 in 2023, where it's this aggressive but legalese in their amendment that sounds nice and fluffy and all that, but you can, drive a truck through the loopholes that they brought. And she was asking, hey, what's the status of all of Ohio's? Because Ohio had way more pro-life laws on the books than Virginia has. But, I said, yeah, as soon as this thing passed, they went straight to court and went after informed consent, went after 24-hour waiting periods. Can you talk a little bit about where we are in the fight today to even just preserve common sense, like 70% agreed upon abortion safeguards, right? The things that
informed consent laws.
Yeah, exactly. Where do those cases stand? How are you feeling about those today?
So the trial court in Hamilton County found it unconstitutional, the whole bill, not just the new provisions or the heartbeat provisions. So it was very far-reaching, and issued a stay, or an injunction rather.
Mm-hmm.
We asked them to stay it because there's important sovereignty interests here. They declined to do that. We went up to the First District Court of Appeals, and surprisingly to a lot of observers, because that is not a friendly court,
right? Yeah.
For this argument, they sent it back to the trial court and said, this is you went beyond the bounds of your authority under the complaint that was filed.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to go back and redo some of it. So we're at this point waiting on further proceedings at the trial court. It is still, pending, and we've got a very difficult case ahead of us. Eventually, it will wind up at the Supreme Court of Ohio. I'm hoping that we can preserve some things like informed consent that are not a direct or indirect burden. They're just
Right.
practice of medicine.
Yeah.
But there's going to be, my prediction is relatively soon, in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to get some case law on what does direct or indirect mean, and what does that mean for the practice of medicine and the standard of care. It can't be, and wasn't argued to the voters, that this was going to suspend the practice of medicine for anything related to abortion.
Right.
But that's the way the left is reading
broad,
the
yeah.
constitutional amendment right now. I don't think that that's rational or supportable, but we've got to get to the Supreme Court to get a fair hearing on it, I think.
Yeah. So just to that end, we've got 2 seats up on the Supreme Court this coming November, and this is the kind of thing that we got to be mindful of. There's a number of things, and we'll talk about some of the other things coming up to the Ohio Supreme Court here soon. General, as you have sparred with the abortion industry in court for years now, can you just give folks an inside glimpse of what it's like to deal with these attorneys, the people they bring in? It tends to not always be Ohio attorneys that are coming in there. I think this is the other thing when David's talking about these big industries. A lot of times, and I remember this from my time in the Arizona Attorney General's office, a lot of folks would look at us as the state, and so we've got all these resources to fight these lawsuits. Well, actually, a lot of times these big corporations, they have more attorneys, they have more people, and they'll play a game where they'll actually try to flood the state. And I'm not saying that's specifically happening with Planned Parenthood, but what is it like going in court against Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and Center for Reproductive Rights, all these behemoth pro-abortion organizations?
Yeah, and they've all got money from the NGO sector. And they've got some of the thought institutions too. There's a major university whose law clinic participated as an amicus and helped moot the other side's stuff. This notion that, my little Solicitor General's office and the few stalwart lawyers we have there are, somehow overwhelming the private sector. And it's really the other way around. We're the David in this fight, not the Goliath. But it's interesting. This happens outside the abortion issue, the life issue. We just tried with 2 lawyers, the First Energy corruption case,
Yeah.
6-week trial. They had a team of 8 lawyers. They had people changing chairs and cycling in. In fact, there was so much money on this, the defense team bought chairs for the trial because they thought the government issued chairs in the courtroom were too uncomfortable to sit in.
I am in the wrong industry,
seriously,
man. Like,
You can't make up a story like that.
Aaron, can we talk about these?
I know, right?
Right.
That's exactly right.
got the general sitting on a wooden stool.
Right now. So it's funny though. Let's remind folks what that one's about, because we've had Brian Stewart on before to talk about Larry Householder and the First Energy situation. Can you remind folks what's the basis of it? Because this has broad implications for the state. Again, especially when you talk about rule of law, does everybody, no matter how powerful they are, does everyone play by the same rules? That's again, when we think about American exceptionalism, that's kind of core to it, is that even the powerful, even the elected, are subject to the rule of law. Can you talk a little bit about the First Energy case?
So that's obviously the House Bill 6 scandal, and this former Speaker Larry Householder is doing a 20-year stint in the federal pen. The Supreme Court of the United States declined to take up his case. So unless he gets clemency, he's got another 15 years to go. But this was First Energy paying for favorable treatment from the state government. Now, our case is a little bit different than the federal case. The federal case was about paying for nuclear bailout and law that guaranteed profitability through an arcane system called decoupling that was in House Bill 6. As we were digging into this case through the Organized Crime Commission, we found that First Energy had paid $4.3 million to Sam Randazzo just before he became chairman of the PUCO. And then he took all kinds of actions at the PUCO and is evidenced by text messages and things of undue influence. And so we believe that that's a bribe. 10 of 12 jurors thought that it was a bribe and would have voted to convict. That jury hung, but we're going to hopefully retry that this coming fall.
So that's an interesting procedural thing. So when there's a hung jury, when you don't get a decision, you get to go back. Do you have to change facts? What does that look like to go back and retry a case in that situation?
It's as though the trial never happened.
Oh, wow.
And you start over and it's a do-over.
Yeah.
And you're not required to do it. You just may. But in this case, if 10 jurors sat through 6 weeks worth of testimony and said, these guys are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that warrants retrial.
Yeah. Speaking of the Ohio Supreme Court, we were saying just this week, a lawsuit was heard at the Court of Appeals related to Ohio School Choice Program.
Yeah.
And this is the teachers union suing to displace over 200,000 kids from the school they're in today. And it's a situation where you have government entities in these school districts using taxpayer dollars to sue the government to get more taxpayer dollars. A vicious cycle that is that blows my mind. Can you talk about your assessment on the Ed Choice lawsuit, where it stands, and what you think the school district's likelihood of success in this situation is.
Well, ultimately, I think we are going to win this case at the Ohio Supreme Court. Um, there's a variety of arguments, and I'm not going to get too deep into them, not only because they're pretty boring and arcane, but we have a live case here, and we speak through our briefs. But ultimately, they failed to prove their case. We were in the 10th District Court of Appeals arguing our appeal yesterday. And like I said, ultimately, I think we're gonna preserve this. Interestingly, it's still the law of the land. So even though it was ruled unconstitutional, the judge had the judicial modesty to stay the ruling while the appeal went forward. And so at this point, I think we're 4 years in, the law is still the law. And as you point out, hundreds of thousands of kids and their parents are getting the benefit of actually being able to choose where they want to send their kid to school. It comes down to this as a policy matter. David, you love this. I know you're a policy wonk. What are we actually buying?
Right.
And the left, the people that are challenging here, saying you're buying a school system with all of its accoutrements, the teachers and the books, and you're supposed to buy that and pay for it. The legislature has said, we're buying education for Ohio's children.
Yes.
And while we have an obligation to provide a public system that is uniform throughout the state, we've done that. And we're empowering parents to direct those dollars as they see fit, consistent with their values and their children's best interest. I think that's entirely consistent with the Constitution. What it's not consistent with is the union-driven agenda of a government system that is a monopoly and brooks no dissent. And that's what this case is ultimately about, and why I'm confident that it is not unconstitutional.
And they never, this was the conversation I was having with a couple reporters this week, is you read their briefs, you read their public comments. Everything is about our money, our system, our system. There's no concern about the kids. There's no talk about the kids. And the thing that I wish somebody somebody in the press would just ask these teachers unions is, hey, have you asked yourself, why is it the minute these families find out they can actually afford an option, gone, they leave, they jet, right? There's no self-reflection in this entire conversation around, hey, why is it that people are so desperate? That there was just in the plane dealer this week, there was a story about our national SGO, and the quote was something like this could be the downfall of public education, which was a massive overstatement. But at the same time, it's like, okay, so what you're saying is that people don't want your product. People don't want to be there. And if they can get out, they're going to. They're going to. That's the only way this is functionally going to hurt your bottom line in any way, because it's not taking any money away from you. It's just kids saying we don't want to be here anymore.
A free society never builds walls to keep its people in.
Oh, well done. Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. I'm looking at that article that you referenced, and they're criticizing it as a mechanism for redirecting public money. Like, not even acknowledging.
That's called an appropriation.
Right. Exactly. Right. Just there's some doozies in this podcast, and like, oh, why can't I give my money?
They did a podcast too. That's our buddy Chris Quinn did that one too.
Yep.
Oh, our favorite.
He wants
guy.
to be able to give his money or redirect his money to National Park Foundation.
Yeah.
Why can't he do that? Like, well, yeah, why can't you do that?
I mean, just to those
could do that if he can get the legislature
exactly.
pass a law that gives him that right. That's called the democratic process. Look, the fact that policy choices get made necessarily excludes other policy choices. There is no divine right to tax money.
Yep.
You know, this is an issue. So all of our kids, came up in the public, so they went to kindergarten in the public schools. We got the grade card from the school district that said they were failing in every area except for the passing rate. So we pulled our kids out. My wife homeschooled, my wife, and thankfully they're all thriving now. But when we're talking about the media, I mean, to those of you who are listening, when is the last time you heard? You would think this would be front page news. When is the last time you heard that less than a third of Ohio's children, third graders, fourth graders, are proficient in reading?
Yeah.
Less than a third, fourth and eighth graders are proficient in math. You would think that would be front page news, especially if it's been the last decade of kids not being able to read well and do math well. But you don't hear it. Right. And I just put, we're putting pictures up all around the wall. So, I had to put a brother on the wall in my office. And Frederick Douglass, the greatest of all lobbyists, he said that when he was trying to read, it was actually his master's mistress that was teaching him how to read the Bible. And when the master found out, he rebuked the mistress because he said, if you teach them to read, they are no longer qualified to be a slave. And that's the question I have for those of us that are listening in Ohio. We need to hold these people accountable because it is egregious that not only are they keeping these kids held back for a purpose, but they're not even going to report that this is an issue in our state.
No, amen. General, speaking of the media, we haven't had a chance to debrief on the podcast going back a few months to all things City Club. And you blessed us by weighing in there when it looked like they were going to cancel the event. But then you took fire as well from Chris Quinn and the plane dealer through all of that. What were your thoughts on that whole situation? You've been dealing with a lot of these folks for a while as well, but what was your debrief after that whole charade, I guess?
Well, first of all, kudos to you for engaging. A lot of people in the conservative space simply won't engage with the City Club, won't engage with the news media, and I compliment you. You don't hide.
Appreciate that.
You're out there. So we need more Aaron Bears that are willing to take the message into the marketplace and
even
not just talk to ourselves.
Even a broke clock is right. Twice
Nah. But look, I wasn't surprised. Some of the behavior was disappointing.
Yeah.
But expected. And candidly, if the situation had been reversed and the head of the ACLU had come in to talk to a 9/12 meeting,
right?
I think some of the same laughter and boos and pointed questions would have occurred. Look, I thought you did a great job. And that was America. There's nothing. This whole notion that civicness is about, and civil behavior is about being nice to each other and not getting upset and not being passionate. Baloney.
Yeah.
What it is about is engaging with each other and observing some rules, and that's the battle because those rules have been eroded. Used to be Voltaire, said, I despise what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Now it's, I despise what you say, and you'd better shut up or you're going to be the one that'll die.
Exactly. Yeah. No, seriously. Well, I think to me, and I think that's a really fair thing to say. Listen, if the scales were reversed, right, you probably would have had a pretty tense environment with somebody, the ACLU going in. I think the interesting thing there is the City Club projects themselves as nonpartisan. I give Dan a lot of credit for, this was, from my understanding, what he said, one of the first times they've had someone of our ilk on stage in that way. The other thing though that jumped out to me was, the questions we got, especially from the audience. Dan's questions were very much just sort of setting the stage, and he did ask some pointed questions. But the questions I got from the audience in particular, they're really, and I don't say this because I'm some intellectual giant by any stretch. There really never was a question. I left there both encouraged because it was fun and enjoy the back and forth, all that kind of stuff.
But you weren't smiling, right?
I wasn't smiling. That's right. I'm not allowed to smile.
Smiling.
But even that one, that's a great example of. I left there with the more I thought and debriefed from that thing with Maria, the more I realized, man, we are so far divided because the questions I was being asked were questions targeted at a caricature of us, right? Like the one guy got up there and said, why do you say America's a Christian nation, why do you want to kick all Muslims out of the country?
Hmm?
And I was like, what now? Like, well, we don't want to kick all Muslims out of the country. So next question. But the fact, like, we can laugh about it and be that, that's silly. But it is just, those folks truly believe that about us. And it is that part of it is like, okay, we've got, this divide is much bigger than I think a lot of us appreciate sometimes.
Well, I think that's right. But I think part of that is on us to the extent that we've abandoned, talking about conservatives here broadly, to the extent that we've abandoned some of these uncomfortable public places, we leave nothing in its place except a caricature. The beauty of you going up to the Cleveland Club and engaging with them is nobody could fairly have sat there and walked away and a couple weeks later after having thought about the conversation said the caricature is accurate.
Yeah.
They might still hate you.
Yeah.
They might still not like what you stand for.
Yeah.
But you were different than the caricature, and that's why it's so important for the work that you guys do to be out there in the marketplace of ideas and knocking that down. At least be who you are and not leaving the caricature as the definition.
Yeah.
Yeah, General, I know we are probably coming to a close in this interview, but I wanted to thank you. When I first started in this work about 6.5 years ago, no fan of politicians, no fan of just about anything that goes on around this state house. But
Still not. Let's be honest.
Still not, right? You had a bunch of media in here, and I asked them, "What, are we under attack? Like, what's going on? Get them out of my office."
I even protected you from them. I kept them away from you.
Yeah, let them at me. So, I want to thank you, man, because you wrote a book recently. My wife and I bumped into you in Florida last year, and the book is entitled "Stand." And that's, when I see you around the Cap Square, that's what I see. I see a man that is standing. Whether it's popular, unpopular, usually unpopular, you are standing. You stood for the SAFE Act, right? We worked so hard for years to get that passed, and here comes the ACLU to tear everything down. And you were right there, not just in court, but in the media, standing up for facts and truth. I just want to thank you. And if you could, for our audience, those that are thinking about engaging in public policy and civics, what would you say to encourage them to stand on their convictions and not play politics, but just stand on truth?
Yeah, I would start by encouraging everybody that's in the arena to step back a little bit and have a little bit of humility. There are things that I will never compromise on, things that I am convinced beyond persuasion otherwise. But I think we ought to be humble enough to recognize that not everything that we think we understand, do we understand. If we serve an infinite God, particularly us Christians who believe in an infinite, omniscient God, it is the height of folly to think that we are right about 100% of the things 100% of the times. And it's off-putting. I love Kristen Wagner, who runs the ADF. She talks about a winsome conservatism. I think that starts with a little bit of humility. But to your listeners who are thinking, boy, I would never want to go down to that mess.
Like I did.
Well, your brother, you're in it.
That's right. Yeah. I'm here now.
and I appreciate the fact that you're in it. Nothing will happen if we don't take a stand. If it's been said that the cost of not being involved with government is to be governed by your inferiors. I think that was Plato. Christians don't need force because they have the kingdom of God, but they do have to be salt and light. If we retreat from the world, it doesn't matter how salty or how lighty we are, we're under a bushel. We have to live our lives wherever we are, and there is some subset of us who are called to the arena, and we have to be willing to get out there and to not be afraid of what we believe. Lord knows the left isn't. They don't apologize for what they believe. They're not sensitive or worried about offending people. They just get right out there and make their case. We need to get out there and make our case because we have the benefit of having the truth on our side.
Amen.
Mike is our resident lefty. You have a rebuttal for that?
Exactly.
Wow, that
really?
Man, I would like to know what you have seen in me.
I was going to say Troy's our resident lefty.
That's right.
Anyway, so speaking of ADF, some pretty incredible news came out last week that you would be leaving the Attorney General's office and taking a role with ADF, I'm sure, among other things as well. But can you share why ADF and why now? What's the story here with this transition coming up?
Well, for those listeners who don't know, the Alliance for Defending Freedom is the largest Christian law firm in the world. They've won 18 cases in the last 15 years at the Supreme Court. They're a force to be reckoned with. And the opportunity for me to go to work with them, I'll be vice president for policy and innovation, strategic policy and innovation. Too many words in a title.
That's all of us that have worked with ADF for years. They've got the most robust titles that lawyers come up with. That's
nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
But the opportunity to work at the intersection of law and policy at that level is just something I couldn't pass up, and really, really excited. I'll be able to use the legal and intellectual skills I've developed over a lifetime and hopefully leave behind me a body of work that will help inform and equip the next generation for the incredible challenges. David, I don't need to tell you or Aaron this or Mike, that we are in the most rapid change right now that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution, and maybe even greater than the Industrial Revolution. The displacement of almost everything of the existing order is making this a very dangerous time. But what doesn't change is first principles, the dignity of the individual, the value of the human creation, and I'm looking forward to serving God as best I can where He leads me.
Yeah. And I'll just say on that end, CCV, we're associated with ADF and have been blessed by their expertise and leadership, especially in the religious freedom area, but across the board. They were the leads on the Dobbs case and on so many other cases through the years, and it's a perfect partnership, sir. So excited for you for what's next.
Yeah, well, General, so grateful for the time today, and also want to close us by saying thank you so much for your service to the great state of Ohio for these many years. We're truly grateful to have worked with you here at CCV and to see what you've been able to do for the state. So God bless you and good luck to you as you move on to that next stage. And thank you so much for joining us today on The Narrative.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.